OMing. This talk is streamed on various places on Instagram and whatnot. So sit tight. What a weird phrase. All right, let's go for it. So, hello everyone. Welcome to Eros Talks. We're so glad you're here. My name is Aubrey, and I'm your host today. The Eros platform is a global community dedicated to exploring the power of Eros as a path to deeper connection, creativity, and personal growth. Today's speaker is the I want to say inimitable, but I actually don't even know what that means, but it sounds right. The honorable Rachel Caine. Um, and let's see, Rachel started her career at a global law firm in Sydney, Australia. She has been OMing for 10 years, about as long as she's been practicing law, and has been One Taste's in-house counsel through its litigation to defend and advance the Eros lineage. I really like that, Rach. That's awesome. So, without further ado, I give you Rachel, and she will speak for a while, and then we'll do a time for Q&A.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Like Aubrey said, my name is Rachel, and I'm originally from Australia. And I learned orgasmic meditation just over 10 years ago now in September 2014. And I came to orgasmic meditation through a very circuitous route, which looking back at it is kind of perfect for my life. But also looking back at it is kind of a miracle that I even found orgasmic meditation, let alone One Taste at all. So I read about orgasmic meditation when I was living in a place called Xi'an in China, which is kind of in the heart of China. It's the historic capital of China, where the terracotta warriors are buried, if you've ever heard of those. And I read about it in a book by Tim Ferriss, who was a biohacker and an angel investor. And I was in the middle of China, and they have very different social rules and etiquette and everything. So I was not about to practice orgasmic meditation in China. So I just kind of made a mental note about it. And then the next year, when I got back to Australia, I went to the local bookstore and asked them if they had a copy of this book, which is mentioned in Tim Ferriss's book called Slow Sex by Nicole Daedone. And they didn't have it, but they had some other book that Tim Ferriss referenced in his book. And so I got that one rather than order the Slow Sex book from America. And I often wonder what would have happened if I had ordered Nicole's book, um, whenever that was. I think I heard about orgasm meditation like 3 or 4 years before I actually did it. So I often wonder what would happen if I had just learned about it straight from Nicole more immediately. But instead, I finished my law degree. And I was actually, when I was in law school, I was thinking one of the topics that really struck me as important and that I really cared about was when I was studying criminal law, I did a unit on sexual assault law. And it was very like upsetting and kind of horrified about the statistics in that area of law, in that most people are not prosecuted. And then those that are prosecuted, very few of them are convicted. And then those that are convicted, most of them reoffend. And that was very horrifying to me. And I was very upset by the fact that the law wasn't actually achieving anything. It was just a very bad band-aid over a system that clearly wasn't working. And the process of law reform takes, like a decade in and of itself. And so, and the cases that I read, because when you're in law school, you don't read typical cases, you read the like exemplar cases. And those are very intense in that particular area of law. So the stories were really intense, and the fact that I felt like I couldn't do anything about it was really intense. And so I just kind of went on my way studying law, and I decided to become a like corporate attorney doing contracts rather than going into criminal law. I felt like I had, kind of equal chance at changing the system by just being an advocate for change on the outside. And so I was very involved at my firm, and while I was in law school, kind of raising money and gathering clothes for women who are in shelters to be able to go to interviews wearing professional clothing, and um, raising money for that sort of thing, and just generally like very, very feminist, not very, but like, had my activist streak for that particular issue. And then I went into this law firm, which is the third largest law firm in the world. And I, worked in Hong Kong and Singapore, and I was just getting started in my career. And I was dating a guy who was a management consultant, and I had very specific rules about who I should date and what life should look like. And my mother had told me some very conflicting values, which were um, you should be independent, and you should make your own money, and you should have your own assets and that sort of thing, be an independent feminist woman. And then at the same time, you should also marry someone who is wealthy and don't pay any of your own expenses, and um, almost kind of be a kept woman and kind of have the best of both worlds. And so I had a very interesting kind of set of values growing up. And so I was dating this management consulting guy who I was very into, and he was not as into, well, we were very into each other, but we had not such great sexual chemistry. And so when it was breaking up, I was like, okay, I'm looking around for what to do with myself. And I went on to Meetup and found an orgasmic meditation class. And I was very lucky that I had read Tim Ferriss's book before, because if I had just stumbled upon an orgasmic meditation class without having read that book, I would have instantly dismissed it as very woo-woo, very hippie, not at all for me. I grew up, my parents were both very staunch atheists, and it was very common in my household that the phrase, the religion is the opiate of the masses was like a weekly textual reference kind of thing in my house. And so um, the idea of doing orgasmic meditation there was no way in hell I would have done it other than a very rational, credible person had said it was very effective, or at least very interesting. And so I went down to a workshop on orgasmic meditation, and it was funny because it was a very awkward experience. I didn't know what I was doing. The person I asked to do the practice round at the end of trying the practice had a lot of bravado, but also had no idea what he was doing. And so I had a very kind of clunky first experience. Um, but there was something kind of really compelling about it. And I kept going back, and I kept doing the practice. And one huge feature of starting the practice for me was I didn't know at the time, but it was the first class of orgasmic meditation in Australia ever. And so there was no one to practice with other than the people who I'd met in that class. And so I had exchanged phone numbers with these people, but I'd only known any of these people for like 4 hours. And another part of my feminist upbringing from my mother was not trusting men at all. My mother was very jaded and very, I don't know, like offensively defensive about men. In the sense that she said, you can't trust men, they only want to have sex. Men rape, pillage, and plunder kind of thing. You can't even trust, your husband alone with your own child. And you can't even trust them to not, sexually assault the child, their own child. And I know that does happen, but it was very far removed from my personal experience growing up. And so it was a lot of fear. I had a lot of fear of men in my life. Even though there was no real reason to. I had gone to an all-girls school. I was very safe in every respect of the word. But I had a lot of fear of men growing up. And so doing this practice was very, I had to really reconsider, or not even reconsider, I was just relearning and learning a new way to see men, because I would walk into, this is the power of orgasmic meditation, because you ask any woman, like, is it safe to go to a strange man's house and ask him to touch your genitals and expect that you won't be raped? Like, no, like that's not like in the normal parlance of most women. That is like a big red flag for most people. But I found myself through this practice, kind of walking into strangers' houses who I only knew did this practice. That's the only thing I knew about them. And asking if they wanted to do this practice, and then doing this practice. And then kind of at the beginning, I was like worried, was his computer open? Was he like secretly filming me? Like, what was he doing with his phone? I had all of these kind of neuroses about it. But then over time, I just realized, oh, like these guys just want the same thing I want, which is this nourishment that you get through erotic connection, um, that you don't necessarily have to have all of the bells and whistles for. Like when I heard about orgasmic meditation, I was like, this sounds like the most feminist thing you could do. There's a guy who's just going to stroke my genitals, and I don't have to pay him back financially, emotionally, sexually, nothing. Like, what could be more feminist than that? This is amazing. And that was my experience, that um, we both just wanted the same thing, which was that erotic nourishment and connection. And so I started to trust men. I didn't realize I didn't trust men, but I started to learn to trust men, that they didn't have bad intentions and that they actually had good intentions. And that they had every intention of wanting me to have a good experience. And so that was kind of mind-boggling to me. Um, and I had been during law school, ironically, during law school, I had had an experience where, I was having a housewarming party, and a guy who I had kind of like a flirtation with, who was like 2 years or 3 years older than me in law school, came over, and um, he brought alcohol, and we were drinking it together, and things got hot and heavy, and then we were in my bedroom, and then we got to a point where I didn't want to continue, and he wanted to continue. And and w if it weren't for the fact that he was more drunk than I was, it would have continued to a point that I didn't want to get to. But as it was, I was less drunk and strong, and was able to kind of like push him off, and I ended up sleeping in my living room overnight. And then he came out of my bedroom in the morning and kind of like yelled at me about how I was leading him on and all of these things. And I was like, I walked right in for the experience, very uncomfortable, um, but mainly just uncomfortable, and very awkward, because I saw this guy every day on campus. But then a friend of mine came back from some kind of college event and said, I just learned about this thing called date rape, and described kind of the experience that I had had, where, someone, you're in a setting that is like flirtatious, and then it tips from like an enjoyable experience into something you didn't consent to. And I felt like I had my mind blown, and I was like, that's what happened to me. I was almost date raped. And I really clung to that label for the rest of college. And it made my kind of passion about sexual assault law even more fervent, and it became kind of part of my identity, and something that I wanted to like stop other women experiencing. And I still do want to stop other women experiencing that, but through learning orgasmic meditation, I've started to develop a very different kind of perspective on that experience, which has been really a relief for me. So I became a lawyer, and I, started learning this practice while I was a lawyer, and I would go like an hour out of my way before work to do this practice with someone else who had learned in Sydney. and we would have two OMs, and then I would go to work in the morning. And people started noticing how much more energy I had, how much more bubbly I was, and started asking me what I was doing. And I said, oh, I'm doing this body-based meditation practice because I didn't really want to talk about orgasmic meditation at work. And everyone was like, wow, it really works. It really works. You can very clearly, like I can see it working. And I ended up going to a coaching program to learn how to teach orgasmic meditation in San Francisco. It worked so well. I was like, I want to learn more about this. And so I flew once a month from Sydney to San Francisco, which is quite a long flight. It's 14 hours direct. And also on a different day, you lose a day going there. Or you gain a day going to San Francisco and you lose a day coming back. And so once a month I would fly to San Francisco and do this training. And about 3 months into the training, I had this experience where I was I had spent a lot of time and money doing the program, but it was starting to get kind of difficult on both in terms of time and money. And so I said to someone, can you help me decide if I want to continue coming to San Francisco once a month to do this program? And all he said to me was, what do you think? And I kind of burst into tears, and I had this probably the only epiphany I've ever had where I had this realization, oh my gosh, I think OM will end sexual violence. And I broke down crying, and I was like, I guess I'm doing the rest of the program then. And it wasn't actually, it was maybe 2 months later, I actually moved to San Francisco and kind of showed up on One Taste Store saying, I want to work for you now. And so, it took a couple months to figure that out, but that ended up happening. And the reason why I think orgasmic meditation will end sexual violence is because it's it teaches men and women the skills that no one has ever learned, that everyone needs in order to negotiate a sexual setting. And I don't know why people think as soon as you turn, in Australia it's 16, I think in America it must be 18, that you're suddenly equipped to handle that. I know people start a lot younger. I started actually quite late. I was 19, I think, when I first started being sexual with other people. And but the amount of education that we have for sexual expression versus the amount of education we have for social conditioning or what's the word, objectification, both men of women and women of men. We have a lot more education in objectification than we do in connection. And, for women, that looks a lot like Disney stories and when I was growing up, like the Princess Diaries, a lot of fairy tale kind of stories or even Pretty Woman, where if you luck upon the right person, your knight in shining armor will come save you and will take care of you financially. He'll be handsome, and then you'll live happily ever after. And then I don't actually know what the male equivalent is. I guess it's probably kind of action movies where you rescue the helpless woman, and then probably pornography where women are a sexual object. And I think women and men objectify each other in different ways. So I do not place all the blame on men by any stretch of the imagination. I think we're men and women are equally culpable. But there's a lot of education and inculcation in a lot of stories and narratives and ways of thinking about men and women and sexual and romantic connection that you get from from the cradle. And there is no similar education for erotic connection, other than, the classic, we call it in Australia PE, I think you might call it phys ed or something. The gym kind of talk about the birds and the bees and that kind of rudimentary explanation of biology. which is definitely not sufficient to have either men or women have um, a satisfying experience. And rarely is it sufficient to have even a, I don't know, successful experience. um, and so, and then beyond that, beyond, like actual training and connection, women are taught through those stories to withhold sex as a way to secure love. And men are taught to pursue women as a way to get both love and sex. And so you have women in this kind of constantly retreating position and men in this constantly chasing position. And then some men who've just given, men and women who've just given up and are like, I am done with this whole game. It is not winning. It is not satisfying. I am not winning. I'm out. But typically women are kind of in a retreating position and men are in a chasing position. And that is enforced as desirable and on both sides. Women, you want to be chased, and men, you like the chase, that kind of thing. And so, but when it comes to erotic connection, that does not work because then it shows up as women not knowing what they want and not expressing what they want. Not expressing what they want, often because they don't know what they want, often because they have been taught that wanting sex is bad or cheap or makes you a whore or that kind of thing. And then you have men who have been taught to overcome boundaries rather than draw a woman out. Either to overcome boundaries, either because it's socially wanted or like that's the narrative that's actually wanted, that you want the knight in shining armor to come bust through the doors and kiss you when you're unconscious. Either that's what you want, or because it's necessary because the women that you're pursuing are running away from you. And so either way, there is a, a scarcity that we've created. Nicole Daedone calls it the pussy cartel, where withdrawal is like the currency of sex, and then conquering is the only solution. But that results in men not being sensitive to boundaries, and that results in sexual assault. And then you have women who, like I said, don't know what they want, but also don't communicate boundaries because we're taught that having boundaries is bad. You should be accommodating and always agreeable and just say yes, that kind of thing. But that doesn't work. And it's funny because even in our feminist rhetoric culture now, with the rise of Me Too, I don't think women have actually gotten better at it. I think you can say you should have boundaries or say, you should express your mind. But if you've never practiced doing that, there is, you're just paying lip service to the idea. And then when the moment arises where you need to know what you want or you need to say what you don't want, you don't have the skills to do that. And so we're kind of cutting off our nose to spite our face in the sense that we're saying it, you shouldn't have to talk about these things, but then we're complaining after the fact that it didn't go the way we wanted it to go. And I think it's a lose-lose situation for everyone involved. And so when I went to one taste, I felt like I witnessed a world where that was not the reality. I witnessed a world where women were vocal with what they wanted, and but also vocal in helping men succeed with them. Not just saying you're an idiot and you can't, like you'll never understand, and which is kind of the like modern rhetoric of women saying like, I cannot with this emotional labor of I don't have to, I should not have to be the one to tell you what I want, and you should have to do some emotional labor of your own kind of thing. And it's just it's I experienced a role where that was not the reality, where women were taking responsibility for what they wanted and for communicating what they wanted, which was amazing. And then I met all of these men who were actually sensitive enough to be able to feel what someone wanted, or even if it's not what they knew they wanted, they could feel what they might want. And they were willing enough to try it out, to give it a try. I think a huge part of why men don't try is because women are capricious. And if you try something, then and it doesn't go well, then you're just as likely to have your head cut off as if you didn't try anything at all. You know, you're kind of equally likely to get yelled at if you try something or you don't try something. So, you know, if it the default can be to like kind of learned helplessness where you don't know what will work. And so you're just kind of waiting for the next cattle prod. And so um, in orgasmic meditation, you learn, saying this, could you adjust in this way? Could you move to the left? Could you move to the right? Could I have lighter pressure? Could I have a slower stroke? Um, all of those are, and then men actually receiving those adjustments and then saying, like, um, not getting so defensive when you get an adjustment that women don't want to give adjustments. Everything about the practice is all of these like little skills that have men and women both learn the things that they need to successfully communicate in an otherwise very highly charged arena, which is sexual interactions. And then I think, it goes beyond that. It goes into, our day-to-day lives. The skills you need for sexual interactions are the same skills you need in a business room or a boardroom or a courtroom. You still need to be able to say what you want, ask for what you want, adjust people when you're not getting what you want, and you need to be able to hear feedback and work together to find the point of connection. All of these things are things that you learned in orgasmic meditation that I have not seen taught in any other way, apart from maybe sport, which is a funny kind of other paradigm. But sport, again, is very kind of goal-oriented and, us versus them, whereas orgasmic meditation is very collaborative and, sport, you probably could say, is more masculine and OMing is more feminine, working together for a common cause. And so, yeah, I started working at One Taste and it has been a wild ride. And one of the things actually when I started working at One Taste was that I talked to Nicole about was she said something like, Eros can include law, but law, uh, she said Eros is, law can be a subset of Eros, but Eros cannot be a subset of law. And that has really stuck with me for now 10 years, where if you start with this erotic outlook on life, where people want the best for each other, women have power, men are happy and willing and wanting to give women what they want, that there's this, creative force that animates the world, that all things self-liberate. If you start with those kind of premises in mind and you work inside of law, or you use law to kind of reach those ends, then you end up in a very beautiful place. But if you start with law, then and you look at Eros, then you end up trying to legalistically manage a very powerful, potent, disruptive, dynamic, creative, destructive force. And that, I think, is the situation we currently find ourselves in, where we have tried to use law to manage Eros and to limit it and to make it follow the rules. And I think it's back to front. I think law needs to be a subset of Eros. And I don't know if you can see behind me, but Nicole wrote a beautiful book called Erotic Justice with Omari West. And I think that is kind of the paradigm that I live in and that I believe we will get the world to, is Eros-informed law, of like connection, creativity, and like power, law found rooted in power versus law that tries to um, either limit power or punish power. And I think that is what we're witnessing right now is since probably the dawn of agriculture, um, no one has known what to do about the erotic impulse. And it seems dangerous to order because it is dangerous to order. Um, Nicole would often talk about how, when a teenager goes through or child goes through puberty, that's when they become unruly and unmanageable and ungovernable. And that's because their erotic body has turned on. And suddenly they, want to separate from their parents, and it's a very tumultuous time. And I think people who never disconnect from that power are the people who change the world, but also the people who the world tries to stop from changing it by controlling them. And people, I think, some people never learn to work with that force, and that force drives them um, in a way that kind of is irreconcilable with order. But then there are other people who are driven by that force and who are intelligently using it to create a new reality. And the legal system treats them pretty much the same, which is to say, like, we will have none of that. And we will criminalize anything that does not look orderly, basically. And so I'm not saying that there isn't room for a legal system which governs people's behavior. I think it's a necessary part of humans gathering together. I think there's some statistic that over like 350 people, you start needing road signs. Although I will say that I went to Bali and you'll notice there is a complete absence of road signs. And people are actually just paying attention to each other and are, in a connected flow. So, query whether or not that's actually real, that you do need those kinds of laws. I do think that in, erotic justice, the idea is everyone actually has inside of them a sense of right and wrong and what is on the spot, what is the spot that is where everything rings, where things are as they should be. And we have kind of shut off from that spot or being connected to that spot in favor of being able to go on autopilot. And so I think, I used to live in China, and to get to the gym, I would get off a bus and have to cross 8 lanes of traffic. And that was just like a main road in China. It wasn't a highway, it was just a main road. And there were no traffic lights. And if you wanted to get across the street, which I had to, you just had to walk out into traffic. But because everyone is used to people walking out into traffic, no one ever gets hit. I mean, people get hit, I'm sure, but more or less everyone is fine because everyone's paying attention to everyone around them. If you did that in an American city, maybe not New York, because New York kind of operates in a very similar way, but if you do that in most American cities, you would get hit because no one is expecting to have to pay attention except when they see a green light or a red light or aren't yellow light. And so I think, we have really turned off our sense of connection to that internal compass of what is right, wrong, on the spot, resonant, in favor of being told what to do. And so I do think it's possible that were everyone to tune into that feeling, that a lot of laws would not be necessary. And, we have a long way to get to that point. So until then, I think there is always going to be a place for law. But I think yeah, orgasmic meditation gave me hope that all of this unnecessary suffering that women go through, that men go through, and it is really devastating for both men and women. Um, we've been sold a very poor bill of goods, both in the sense that we don't know how to approach intimate connections, but also once something is, so you don't know what to do, then when you have some kind of connection, I mean, it can be amazing, but it can also be suboptimal or even negative. And then once you have an experience that you don't know necessarily what to do with, the mindsets that are sold to us as to how to conceptualize those experiences are in and of themselves damaging and reifying in the sense that they like concretize an idea rather than liberate an experience. So women are taught if an experience doesn't go the way you like, even if you agreed to it at the time, even if you agreed to it during the experience, if you wake up the next morning or 10 or 15 years down the line and you decided upon reflection that it didn't go the way you wanted it to go, you get to call foul with pretty much carte blanche, you know, capability. And then on the men's side, there's kind of two approaches. One is or maybe three. One is the like agreeing with women that men are bad or evil or dangerous. Two is, and then kind of like hating yourself and, always judging or fearing yourself and what, your desires and urges and all of those things. Or two, being in opposition to women and saying, women are um, overblowing the whole thing and you can't trust women and they're all lying and that kind of thing. Or three, I think I said this earlier, just kind of like piecing out of the whole situation and being like, I'm just going to be addicted to computer games. They do not present as many problems as real people. But then you have the rise of kind of depression and anxiety because there's that lack of connection. And so, women have outrage, men meet that outrage or with withdrawal or with self-outrage. And it's just not a winning solution. And so, I think orgasmic meditation presents such different narratives, which is, this scenario is perfect with room to evolve. First off, how do I go into a scenario with the knowing I have the power to make it a situation that I like at the end of the day? And then if something happens that I'm not expecting, how do I adjust it during the experience? And then afterwards, if something happened that I didn't like, how do I learn from the experience in such a way that I become a better, more resilient person afterwards? Um, there's this wonderful book called Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb, who's an economist, and he talks about how systems like democracy are not just resilient in that they, withstand stress, they are anti-fragile in that they get more strong through undergoing stress. And systems like communism don't because, there's only so much stress they can take before they break. And I think, orgasmic meditation leads to anti-fragile humans because you can be in a situation that involves either high arousal, and high arousal is either coded as anxiety or excitement, but either way, they're intense situations. So you can be in an intense situation and no matter what happens, have an experience that you use to be a better, more complex person at the end of it. And that is not how we're teaching people to be these days. And I think it's something that we need in order to A, be happy and B, have a world where we work together with people instead of feeling like we're always in opposition against other people. Either, men are in opposition to women or women in opposition to men. but that just kind of perpetuates the unhappiness and the lack of uh, connection, and as a byproduct of people being unhappy and disconnected and not nourished in a really fundamental way, um, it breeds more of the checked out culture that um, we are trying to we here on the Eros platform are trying to overcome, or not even overcome, but just find a better, more enjoyable way forward. I think that's as much as I can talk for without running out of things to say, at least for today. So I wonder if anyone has any questions or thoughts. I'd love to riff with one or more of you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Rach. That's one way to peak it. I can speak no longer. Okay, so yeah, as she said, we'll open the floor for questions, discussion. I always try to make it a little like you don't have to stick it in the form of a question if you just
Yeah.
have like a, you know,
I actually just remembered other things I could talk about. So while people are thinking about questions,
Get
I
your hands up. Put your electronic hands up. She's buying you some time. I want to see those hands.
I was thinking, oh, like this is unfortunately where One Taste found itself, where One Taste and Rachel and Nicole found themselves, is in the personal, I grew up studying a lot of history, and one thing, saying history is the personal is political. And where the same kind of thing I've been talking about how orgasmic meditation is the end of sexual violence, I think that One Taste got in the crosshairs of a larger cultural debate about that, where um, just as there's violence against women, which is caused by many factors that I've talked about today, including women's lack of knowing what they want, knowing how to express what they want, and knowing how to express what they don't want, and men's lack of training and sensitivity to respond to any of those things. I lost my train of thought, but just as we're dealing with that on a personal level, I think we're dealing with violence against women on a social level, which is the violence that is like attacking women's sexuality, and wanting women to not be sexual women, and and imprisoning women who come out as proudly sexual women. And the Netflix film was very much that, that had that thesis of being a sexual woman is dangerous. Sexual women who are overtly sexual are actually, it's either dangerous to you personally, or you are the one who is dangerous if you are sexual. And you kind of get to choose which of those you are. Either you're the person who was in danger, or you're the person who created the danger. And I think that is what we're up against. And the narrative that the Netflix film told was that these women were in danger of other sexual women. When in fact, all of the evidence for that whole proposition turned out to be faked for money. And so I think, the personal is political in that way. And that, I appreciate everyone who is on this platform and wants to be part of this conversation, because I think if we want the kind of erotic nourishment that everyone wants, whether or not you admit it or not, if we want to live in a world where it's normal to have erotic nourishment and connection, these are the fights that we're going to have and that we are having.
Thanks, Rach. Shannon has a question.
Hello, Rachel.
Hi, Shauna.
Um, this talk is so necessary. It's been fantastic. I've known you for a long time, and I really appreciated hearing some details from your background and story that I hadn't heard before. So this is wonderful. Um, so this is like a combination comment, reflection, and question. So I'll get it all in there. So um, I so appreciated that you brought up like the education that we don't get as adults. Like we come into uh, a world of hormones and experiences in our bodies, and we don't get trained in like how to work with that. And I think OM is such an important uh, way of like getting in touch with that and learning how to communicate. And I agree that that's so lacking in our culture. And so anytime that that subject gets airtime, I'm super grateful. So thank you for putting it the way that you did. I I guess my questions are, what do you see as for us as individuals, like how can we move this forward, like the next step in the evolution of making the changes that are necessary? So yeah, as individuals, what can we do? And then how do you also see what we can do to influence the law in this arena as a next step?
Great questions. Um, I think as individuals, the best thing you can do is yourself have like a working understanding of this. And I know you personally do have a working understanding of this, so I think you're doing great on that front. But yeah, I think so much of our world operates on ideas and not on experience. And someone having their own personal experience of this other way of relating, connecting, and having their own sense of power, as a woman and in your connections with men, and as a man, if you equally the same, having an empowered experience of the erotic with women, where where you can reliably have an experience and both of you will walk away feeling either like you had a good experience or you communicated what you needed to um, learn from that experience and have a better experience next time. I think if you have that experience in and of yourself, then you can, everyone you interact with is gonna be better. So that's a great start. And B, you can communicate that to other people as a possibility. There's like a different way of being where this new reality is possible, where you can actually know what you want, say what you want, say what you don't want, and when you will be heard and responded to, um, that like sharing that reality with people has it be a possibility as opposed to not even an awareness of that possibility. So I think that's a great start. And then I think just things change, unfortunately, probably slower than I would like. But also, person to person. I think all of the greatest changes in the world have come through um, a groundswell and through personal connections. And I think this one will be no different. And so I think what I would say is, talk freely about it. And in doing so, you can dispel the shame that a lot of people feel about these topics, but also educate. Um, and I think probably, very similar to, education and reading, if you want to teach a, a family to read, you teach the mother. And then she'll teach, her children, she'll teach her husband, everyone in the family will learn how to read. And so I think that, this will be spread through women. And so the more conversations you have with women, with younger women, older women, I think it's kind of like, I don't know, like getting an inheritance that just grows the more that you share it with other people, kind of thing. That's what I think about that. And then I think there was a second part to your question. Maybe there wasn't.
The second part was more about what can we do to influence the law?
Oh, yeah. I think, I have both like a very jaded perspective and a very hopeful perspective in the sense that I don't think the law changes easily, but I do think it responds to the right kinds of pressure. And I do think you never know what that pressure is going to be. I think the laws have been changing to be, I think that they respond to women. I think laws respond to women because women have believed themselves needing a man's protection for a very long time. And then in the 70s and 80s, women decided that they didn't need a man's protection and that they, wouldn't wanted to, I mean, starting in the 1800s, wanted to vote and participate in social, social and political life. And through that desire, laws changed. And now we're in a space where the laws are changing in the opposite direction, where women are saying, I don't want to be responsible for my sexuality. I want the government to decide whether or not I am a victim. I think they're changing in the wrong direction, but I think they do respond to women's desire. And so I think it comes back to your first question of what can I do? And I think that is turn other women on to the possibility that erotic nourishment is possible, and that it's more enjoyable than the alternative.
Brilliant. Thank you. My takeaway is be the change you want to see in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shan.
Thank you. Okay, so we have one last one on Instagram. Pretty Slick said a discussion on Threads recently said that women are increasingly prepared for success in all spheres by decades of feminism, and that there is no similar philosophy preparing men, which is why they are stagnant or retreating. How can men be prepared to meet women on their climb, in your opinion?
Great question. I think I would say through the practice of orgasmic meditation. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think men have been taught that power is a zero-sum game, and that if I have power, it means someone else doesn't, or if someone has power, it means that I don't. And I don't think that's how power works in a feminine world. I do think men and women need to learn this as much as men, because women have grown up in a society where masculine power is the norm. And so women are honestly just as bad at competing and dominating sometimes. But I think that through the practice of orgasmic meditation, you really just learn in your body that if I win, someone else wins. If I give you the stroke that you want, we both get nourished by that stroke. It's not like I give it to you and I lose what I want. We both get what we want. And that is, I think, the model for how men and women can be successful together. And then, like I said, men have been taught to conquer, and that extends to not just on a social and personal level, but that extends to a business and political level, which is that the idea is you overrun boundaries, your own and other people's, in order to be successful or on top of the pile of people. And that means that you lack, in order to dominate, you have to overrun your own boundaries. And that's why I think, men are burnt out and definitely commit suicide at a higher rate than women. Are more likely to be violently murdered than women, and also have worse health than women long term. in a lot of markers. And so, because we've taught men that they should go over their own boundaries in order to succeed. And so, men really learning to listen to their bodies teaches them, A, to take care of themselves in a way that has them be able to have sustainable lives and connections, and B, teaches them how to listen and respond to women's bodies and what women are communicating non-verbally. And we know that most communication is non-verbal, but it teaches men and women to be able to listen and respond and with that sensitivity to people's non-verbal communications in a way that has men be able to succeed with women. And then, to communicate, do you want this? I had this, feeling that you wanted this. Is that what you want? I think if men learn how to do that and women learn how to communicate what they want and they don't want, we're going to be in a whole new world in terms of working together to create a future that we all want together.
That was beautiful. Thanks, Rach. Really great. Okay, so let's get 3 reflections ready. Get them ready. Want to see those hands. Get it together. But while we're doing that, let's see. I was going to read one more thing. Oh, well, I don't know what the heck it was. But anyway, the platform is crushing it right now. We're doing really great things on the platform. We're having these talks every day at 10 a.m. PT, 1 p.m. ET, well, every weekday. We're having intro to OM class, free intro to OM classes for anybody who if any of you guys want to take them. You haven't learned to OM yet, or you have friends that you're like, where do I send this person to learn this? We have those. Yeah, we're working on the platform like pretty deeply every day, and really dialing it in to be the kind of world of Eros that we want it to be, and it's just doing great. So we love having you guys here, and then and keep coming to these and keep sharing it. I think that's what I wanted to say. All right, we're gonna do reflections and then we all sign off. Russell.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Russell.
There was one turn of phrase that I just thought was really interesting to hear, and you said how to use a big energy situation to become a better, more complex person. And I think that's always an interesting boundary to that involves awkwardness, and I've never been here, and that's okay. And am I, and just a place to like find both of you settling into some kind of truth.
Thanks, Russell.
Thanks, Russell. You guys are shy today. Are you shy? How about Marianne?
I really enjoyed this. I felt like the inspiration of hearing her story, because I hadn't heard that before either, just hit on point and touched a part of me that was different in just it just was so beautiful. It's hard to even express. So thank you. I loved it.
Thanks, Marianne.
Yeah, thank you for sharing so exquisitely. It was just gorgeous. Like you. Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne. Okay, and I will do the last one. I really enjoyed hearing the it was just like perfect math, it was like perfect math from all of these different experiences that you had, and like one equation led to another to arrive to each of these places. And in each of the moments that you would have a revelation about, oh, this is the key, and now this is the key, it was like each of those was then, what I appreciate is how much action you would immediately put behind that. Like you would have a revelation and you would be like, now my aim is this, you know, and that really came through, that feeling of just like connecting the dots in that way. And so there was that really gratifying feeling the whole time you were talking of like just well put together math, feminine math, you know. So I really love that. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, Aubrey.
Yeah, wonderful talk. All right, thank you everyone for coming. We'll see you tomorrow.